Hello, and welcome back to another game development tutorial. So today, we are actually making a new tutorial series. So this series is going to be about how to make a platformer in Unity 2D. So, if you don't know what a platformer is, just think of Mario just jumping off of platforms. That's pretty much what it is. And no, we're not going to make a copy of Mario. Okay, so this first episode will be about player movement. So, and we're going to set up, of course. So, for one, let's just get set up. So, what we want to do for this tutorial series, I will be using Unity 2019.3.1. And if you do not have that version, then you can go to installs. Then, this is where you can see all your Unity versions. And then, you go to add. And then, if it's on this list, then you can select it. But if it's not, you have to go to download our archive. Then, once you find the version, so I'm going to go to Unity 2019.x. Once it loads, there we go. Scroll down to Unity 2019.3.1, which is right here. Then you press this button and open into Unity Hub. Then give it a second to load. And then it says that it is already installed on Unity Hub, but for you it will just automatically start downloading the version. It might take some time, so you can pause the video and just wait until you're done and play the video. Okay, so I'll now create a new project. So I'll select my arrow to select a Unity version. The version that I want to do is 2019.3.1. Select that. And I want to select the 2D version because this is a 2D platformer. And I'll call this platformer because I don't have a name for the game yet. Then you can choose a place to save your games. I already have one. But if you need one, you can press on these three dots and it'll open up your file explorer or whatever you use. Then you can just select the folder that you want to store it in. So then I'll just press create to create my project. Then my project will create. This can take some time, but hopefully it does not take too long for the sake of this tutorial. Yeah. Let's just see what happens. Okay, and by the way, Unity is not that lightweight, so it can take a while for it to compile and do everything they need to do. That's just a little warning. Okay, so the project has opened for me. So, let's see. Okay, and for your guys' sake, because you don't have this layout, I will just select the default layout for your guys' sake. Okay, cool. So now that we have this project open, I will just create some sprites for the placeholder art for player and ground and environment and all that stuff, because we will start to replace it in the next episode. Okay, so let's just stay organized. Let's right click on our project panel. We want to create a new folder, and we'll call this folder sprites. It's not how you spell sprites. Okay, now I will select our sprites folder, right click on it, and I want to create a sprite, and the sprite that I want to create is a square. Then I'll press enter to actually create it. I want to create one more sprite. So I'll right click, create, go into sprites, and I want to create a triangle. Okay, so now what we can do, just make our scene look a little nicer, let's select our camera, and for our background, we can set this to like a dark gray for now. We will be changing it, but it's just for now. And I like more zoomed out games, so I'll set the camera size to 12, so the camera is more zoomed out. Just changing this Z value will not affect the camera at all. Okay, so now, let's just create our player and our little ground. So, like I said before, let's stay organized and let's create. So let's right click in our hierarchy. Let's create an empty object, and I'll call this my environment. Then I'll right click under the environment, hover over 2D object, and I want to create a sprite. So now the sprite will not show. That's because we still have to select the sprite that we actually want to form as. So in our sprite render component, the sprite that I want to select, if I go under our sprites folder, and I will just drag in our square into that sprite slot. And I'll rename this to ground. And the two components that actually the one component that I will add to this, I'll press add component, and I want to add a box collider 2D. Make sure it's the box collider 2D and not the box collider, because remember we are working in a 2D game now. Okay. Now I will just expand that. That's a nice ground. I'll center it to the axis at 0. And now I will create our little player character. So I'll right click in our project. I want to create a 2D object, and I want to create a sprite. I'll rename it to player. Drag in our square sprite into the sprite slot, and I'll right click on our transform and press reset. I do want to drag our little player down. Okay, so actually, we will be splitting the player into two separate objects. So one, if we right click into our hierarchy, will be an empty object. So reset that transform. I'll rename this object to player. And then for the object with our sprite render on it, I'll rename this to graphics. And then what I want to do, I also want to set this y to 0, and I will make graphics a child of our player, so graphics will go wherever the actual player goes. Okay, so now that we have this, now if we drag on our player into game object, the player graphics will also follow. Okay, so now, let's go under our player, press add component, and we want to add a box collider 2D, and you will see a little green outline around your player. That is the box collider, and you can also edit the box collider to actually fit your player. If you just press the edit collider button, and you can drag on these green squares. And if the green box is not showing for you, it's probably because you have gizmos turned off. So in your scene view, on the top, it should have all of these options called shaded, 2D mode, light, audio, and then on the right side, we want to turn on our gizmos button. And there we go. Now the green box is there. Okay. I want to quickly just add the player tag to our player. This should be a built-in tag into Unity, and if it's not, you can go to add tag, click the plus button, and just add the player tag. Okay, now the last component that I want to add, actually the second to last component that I want to add to this player, is a rigid body 2D. Okay. And you'll notice a couple differences of the rigid body 2D from the rigid body. But they're pretty much the same. It's just that in the rigid body 2D, you can control the gravity scale, and you can control these collision detection in sleeping mode. Okay, so for one, we want to set the gravity scale to 7.5. I'm not a fan of floating jumps, so the character stays in the air for a long time. If you are, you can turn down this gravity scale to maybe 1.5 or 2. But I do not like floaty jumps, as I call them. Then for the collision detection, we want it to be continuous. And for the sleeping mode, I want it to never sleep. Then, we have to do one more thing. Let's go under constraints, and let's freeze our object's Z rotation, so our object cannot rotate on the Z axis. Okay, so now that we have our player, let's just press play, and our player should fall to the ground. Just like that. Okay, so now let's actually get our player to move, because that is a very important part. So, now, staying organized, I'll right click in the project panel. I want to create a new folder, and I'll call the folder scripts. I'll open up the scripts folder by double clicking on it. I'll right click in the scripts folder, create, and I want to create a C# script called player movement. Press enter to actually make the script. Then, right now the player movement script is not applied to the player, so I'll just select our player, just add a component, and I want to add our player movement script. And there we go. We still have to program the movement script, but we have our player almost set up to our liking. But we'll do that after we write the script, just to explain to you, just so I can explain to you a bit better why we're gonna make these changes. Okay, so let's double click on our player movement script to open it up in Visual Studio. And I want to check once that I have autocorrect working. So if I write rigid body, all these options should come up where you can press the up and down arrow to select, to go up and down on the options, and enter to select. If that does not happen for you, don't worry, everything's all right, don't panic. But an easy way to fix that is to go to Edit, then Preferences, and under your external tools, it should say Visual Studio 2019. And if it does not, select the drop down. And if it still does not show up, then you can click Browse, and wherever your Visual Studio 2017 is, or store. Okay, I'm gonna go back into script, and at the top I want to define a few variables. So I will keep the start and update function. I will change the start to an awake function, which is just called before the start function. And the variables that I want to add, I'll make a new header called movement, and I'll show you what a header does when I get back into Unity. So all I did was add a bracket, typed header, and then in quotation marks, I wrote movement. So why I did that, it's just to space everything out so it's more organized. Organization, yay. So now when I go back into, if I make a variable, public float, move speed, if I go back into Unity, and then when this compiles, and if I click on the player, now you'll see a big bolded word that says movement. So that is what a header does. It just spaces everything out and makes it organized. You don't have to do it. It's just my personal preference. Okay. And I'll make one more variable, a private rigid body 2D, because we're working in a 2D game, and I'll call this RB. Then in the awake function, I'll set RB is equal to get component type rigid body 2D. So now it'll just automatically get the rigid body from the player. so we don't have to drag and drop any components into this player script. So now, actually I lied. We need one more variable. We need a private float called move input. And now we're ready to actually make our player move. So the first thing that I want to do is get an input from our arrow keys or WASD. So to do that, I'll say move input is equal to input.getAccessRaw. And what getAccess does, so if I just do getAccess, Unity will apply its own smoothing so the movement is a bit smoother. And getAccessRaw is just snappy movement. I personally like the smoothing, so I will just say getAccess and not getAccessRaw. But if you like snappy movement, you can just say getAccessRaw. Okay, then I'll do parentheses, and you can type this exactly. You have to, the axis they want to get is the horizontal axis, and you have to type this exactly as I do, because it is a built-in Unity input, and if you type it wrong, it won't give you an error. It just won't work. Okay, so now we are detecting our player input. So now we can say rb.velocity equal to a new vector 2, because we're working in a 2D game. So a vector 3 would be pointless, because when a player is moving on the z-axis, it just wouldn't show in a 2D game. So for our x-axis, so for our x value, we will say move speed times move input times time dot delta time. And then for our y-axis, we'll say rb dot velocity dot y. And there we go. So what move input does, so when you press the left arrow key, move input will be set to -1. And when you press the right arrow key, move input will be set to 1. And when we don't press any keys, it'll be set to 0. So then I'll set the move speed to something like 750, or maybe let's just try 750. Then I'll press play, and when I press A and D, our player should move. And right now it is pretty slow, so I'll maybe set the speed to 2000. I think I actually want the smoother movement, so I'll go back into our script and say getAccessRaw. Sorry, I meant the snappier movement. Okay. Then for interpolate, I'll set that to interpolate so it sort of smooths out the collisions, so the player just doesn't abruptly stop. Okay. Then I'll do one more thing. So time dot delta time, I'll say time dot smooth delta time. So right now the player's sort of having a little move speed spurt, so it goes faster in some places. Okay, so that's better. Okay. So now, what I will do, now let's just add our jumping. So, I will create a new header under our movement header, and I'll call this jumping. Then I'll add quite a bit of variables here. I'll add a public transform for our ground check to detect if the player is touching the floor. I'll add a public float called check area. So just to detect how thick the player is. We need a public layer mask called ground layer. Then we need a private bool called is grounded. We also need a public float called, jump force is fine. Then I will make a space of about 10 units. So jump force is distinguished between all these other variables. Okay. It's basically the same thing as header. It creates a little space minus the actual word. So, okay. Then, let's just do it right after we check the input. We can say is grounded is equal to physics 2D dot overlap circle. Then we have to give it two inputs. One is where it will draw the circle, and we want it to draw at our ground check dot position. Then the radius, so this will be our check area. Then one more variable for the layer mask, so we know what is ground. And for that, we'll input our ground layer. And there we go. Now jumping is a lot easier now. So now we can say if input.get button down, and we want to input our jump button, so that is our space key. Or if you want to be the up arrow or W key, I'll show you how to change that in just a little bit. Right after we code this jump. So then, what I want to do when we press jump, we also want to make sure, so I'll write the and, which is the double and sign. And is grounded is equal to true. So if we're touching the ground and we press the jump button, we'll say rb.velocity is equal to vector2.up multiplied by our jump force. And there we go, that's it. If we go back into Unity, we have to assign some variables. So for jump force, I'll say maybe 20. For check area, I'll say 0.45. Then for these two variables, we don't have anything for a ground check, and we don't have any ground layer yet. So first of all, let's just start off with our ground check. I want to right click on our player, press create empty, and I'll rename this to ground check. And we just want to position this right where our player's feet would be. So for me, the Y would be negative 0.5, which as you can see, is right on the player's feet. Then I'll select our player, go back to the movement script, and I will drag in our player ground, and I'll drag in our ground check into the empty ground check box. Now, for the last variable that we have to assign is, let's go up to the top of our player, where it says tag and layer. Let's right next to the text call that's right next to the layer text, it'll have a drop down that says default, and we want to add a layer. And the layer they want to add is a ground layer. So then, let's go back into our player. For the ground layer, we will select ground. Okay, and then don't press play yet. Be patient. We have to select our ground object, and for the tag, actually for the layer, we want to select our ground layer. Now it should work. You can move, and if we press space, you can jump. You can increase the jump height if you want, maybe to like 30. Right now it's still the space bar, I don't really like that. Maybe 25. Okay, one thing that I'll do before I change the key is I'll right click. I want to create a new folder called physics materials. I'll open up that folder, right click, create, and I want to create a physics material 2D, and I'll call this not slippery, I think I'll call it ground. I'll set the friction to 0. Then, what we'll do, in our player's box folder 2D, I will drag in our ground into that empty slot. There we go. Now it's smoother. Okay, now what I want to do, I just want to increase the player speed. So you can keep tweaking these two values until you like your movement. But now what I want to do, I want to change the jump button from space to the up arrow or the W key. So I'll go to Edit, in Project Settings, it'll open up this menu. I'm just going to drag it to the side. Then under Accesses, we can expand that. For a jump button, instead of it being space, I will say W. For negative button, I believe I can just say up. And then I press play. Now it should work. W, yep, and up arrow, yep. Okay, that seems pretty nice. I think I'll increase the player speed a little more. And I think that should be it for this episode. Yep, that's good. So next time we will hopefully go over some double jumping and rule tiles. And if you do not know what that is, you're gonna like it, I think. So yeah, I hope to see you in the next episode, and I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Bye!